A nation can survive its fools, and even the ambitious, but it cannot survive treason from within.
They've been wrong about the wars. They've been wrong about jobs. They've been wrong about everything. The question is, are they stupid or do they have a plan? I actually think for the most part, they have a plan, but some are not too smart.
Welcome to the Horrible, Deplorable Show, the anti-globalist, America First program dedicated to dehoaxing the media and destroying the narrative. Here's your host, the founder and editor of the Daily Stir, Matt Wingard.
Welcome to the Horrible, Deplorable Show. My name is Matt Wingard, and with me as always is my good friend Doris. Hello, Doris.
Hello, Matt.
Want to welcome everyone from the Gab community and let you know that there are lots of ways to listen to this episode and to past episodes. And we know once you fall in love with this show, you're going to want to listen to all the past episodes. You can do that by going to iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Pocket Cast. They're all on YouTube. Just search for The Horrible, Deplorable Show. We also play on the405media.com, 11 a.m. on weekdays, every weekday, and 5 p.m. on the weekends. And you can always go to our website, thedailystir.com, and all of the episodes are there as well, thedailystir.com. So the big breaking news today is this second Project Veritas video about Twitter and what Twitter and its engineers do. And it's quite fascinating. They have about 7 or 8 of these engineers they've caught on video or audio device bragging about how they're able to shadow ban conservatives and Trump supporters on the platform. The first thing that I have to say before I get into the meat of it is that it is clear how they run these. They're basically running honey traps on these engineers because they're all men. Oh, there's one woman, but essentially they're mostly men who do the bragging. And you can tell that the spy or the investigator for Project Veritas is a woman, and she's probably a young, good-looking woman. And these are conversations are taking place at bars. So I know exactly what's happening, which is that essentially if a beautiful woman flirts with a man, he'll basically tell her anything. And so they've gotten all of these young women to go in and chat up these Twitter engineers. I've seen it in these other, by the way, they do it in all of their Project Veritas videos. But 9 times out of 10, the scenario is essentially that a young woman targets a man at a bar, chats him up, and in the course of drinking and flirting with him, he will tell her all of his darkest secrets, everything his employer's doing. He'll reveal all his secrets, essentially just to impress her. And so, I mean, it's obviously a tactic that works, and they got all these Twitter engineers to confess about what they're doing there in shadow banning conservatives. Now, Doris was asking,
What's shadow banning?
So, essentially, the idea in a pure form of Twitter is that everybody's tweeting, and if you like someone, you follow them, and then you can design your timeline so that you're only seeing the people that you're following. That's all your timeline should be. And you can mute people that you're following. So you can follow lots of people, but they don't necessarily all show up in your timeline, only the people that aren't muted. And so you can design your timeline so that you're seeing the tweets that you want to see. Now, the problem for Twitter, and they even admit in these videos that they are 99% liberal there at the company. All the engineers confess that. So there's no Trump supporters there. There's no one who's even remotely conservative. So they don't like the fact that Trump is one of their biggest Twitter accounts, and he has 40 million followers, and he's able to get his message out. And Cernovich and Milo, who they kicked off, and lots of other people have accounts and hundreds of thousands of followers. James Woods has 1 million people following him, and they're able to push out their message and to be heard. And Twitter doesn't like that, so they do something called shadow banning, which means they essentially just turn off your showing up in other people's timeline. So you're tweeting away, and expressing yourself, but Twitter is determined that they don't want other people to see you. So you don't know this, obviously, because you only see your phone. You don't see all the other people's phones, and you don't see that you're not showing up in their timeline, even though they're following you and they want to see your tweets. So they can kind of turn this up or down. They can make it so that your tweets are delayed in how quickly they show up in somebody's timeline. So if you have a conservative you don't like, you can set it so his tweets don't show up until maybe later in the evening, right? So after people maybe are not looking at their phone anymore. So then you can't claim that we're not shadow banning you. Look, his tweets are in your timeline. Yeah, but they came at like 11 p.m. and midnight, right? Whatever. So they showed up when you weren't there looking at it, but also just not show up at all. Or you may go directly to their account and see that they tweeted lots of things you didn't see. You saw some of their tweets, but not all of their tweets. Why didn't all of their tweets show up in your timeline? And so they just use algorithms essentially to suppress accounts that they don't like and to slow them down and to make sure that if you have an account that has 100,000 followers and you don't like it, one way that you would shadow ban it is not for it to not show up at all, but what if you designed it so that every other account it didn't show up in? So then its reach isn't really 100,000 people, its reach is only 50,000 people, right? What if you turn that down to 25%? So they're still showing up, and when somebody says, I don't understand why I'm not seeing this person's tweets, someone else will say, but I'm seeing their tweets, so something just must be wrong on your end. And everybody stays confused, and nobody understands that Twitter is doing this on purpose. And what they're doing with all of these various ways of shadow banning people is trying to reduce the free speech of people on the right that they disagree with. Meanwhile, I just saw this morning that Chelsea Handler is a celebrity who's absolutely crazy. She was just going to town on someone. I forget who it was that she was screaming at and using the F word and making a gay slur. And someone else pointed out that, if a person on the right tweeted this exact same thing, they would get thrown off the platform. And it's true. And I doubt that Twitter's going to do anything about that Chelsea Handler tweet. So, everybody on the right has seen this on Twitter. And I've actually seen people test it. I've watched people who say something that maybe is a racist or a little bit on the hard edge side, and Twitter will tell them, you have to delete this. And then someone else will take the exact same text, like say maybe it was directed at black people, and someone else will take the exact same text and just change black to white, so that the tweet is saying the exact same horrible thing or racist thing about white people, and they tweet it out, and then someone else complains, and Twitter will respond saying, yeah, we looked at that, it's perfectly fine. And then, of course, they take both tweets, the screen capture of both, and they tweet them out. So you can see that the tweets are exactly the same, except for one says black people and the other says white people. And Twitter literally banned one and let the other go. And there's countless examples of that.
So Twitter is actually editing. So what happens when people figure out that Twitter isn't honest?
They go to Gab. And that's the whole reason why Gab got started and why I'm on Gab and why lots of people who listen to this show are on Gab. But the other thing that they're doing is opening themselves up to a lawsuit. I think Facebook and Twitter and these others, they're opening themselves up to a lawsuit in which customers who can correctly prove that there's a double standard and that they're being targeted because of their religious beliefs or because of their political beliefs, that's a cause of action.
But isn't that too difficult to prove?
Well, we got some people that made a bunch of money off Bitcoin, and Chuck Johnson is filing suit. So there are people bringing it, and then ultimately there's the outcry that will come from the public. Look, you can't suppress the free speech of half the people in the country and not expect that that ultimately a government solution will come in. If you don't think the government regulators won't eventually move on these tech companies because they have outsized influence. Jeff Bezos, who's not exactly, he's the owner of Amazon. I'm just going to use him as an example, though, because he just recently surpassed $105 billion in net worth. He's the richest man who ever lived. And as I've tried to warn on this show before, he just surpassed Bill Gates and became number one, but he's just in the early stages of growing the size and scope of what Amazon.com is going to do. It will not surprise me if Jeff Bezos gets to $1 trillion in net worth. Once the malls have closed and Amazon has devoured most of the retail chain system, so that, let's say if they controlled 25%, that would be massive. But what if they controlled 50%? What if 50% of everything that's purchased in this country was delivered by Amazon? That makes Walmart look like your local AM/PM. Amazon is becoming a behemoth of such size and scope, and I'm trying to warn people about this, that, at the rate at which it's going, they're talking about the fact that it may soon buy Kmart, so that it will have physical locations for some period of time, which will basically, I'm sure, just be turned into warehouses for local drone distribution. But to control all consumer sales in the United States, or to have, say, a 25% share of that. Well, Walmart does not have a 25% share of all of the consumer sales in this country. Not even close. And Amazon could get there, and they could get to 50% or beyond. That is tremendous control. Whenever I tweet or gab out an article about Jeff Bezos, I don't use his picture. I use a picture of Dr. Evil from the Austin Powers movies. A, because he looks like him. But B, I'm trying to make the point that this is a tremendous amount of power to put into one person's hands. And he's just one example. If you don't think that Zuckerberg at Facebook and this guy Jack at Twitter, this is tremendous power that these people have. Twitter is an enormous vehicle. It is bigger than the New York Times. It is bigger than, it's probably more influential or as influential as every single newspaper in the country combined. Probably more. That's very, very powerful. Imagine if one person owned every single newspaper in the United States. Okay. But Twitter has that kind of influence because of the way that it can push out a message and the way things can move very fast across the platform. And they don't have any transparency about how they run these organizations. They claim to have rules, but these rules are very subjective. They're implemented subjectively, and they are doing what they please. And when you find out that, at a place like Twitter, it's located in San Francisco, and on camera, 8 employees readily admit to you that they are 99% liberal and they are 99% hating Trump, turn it around. If somebody owned every single newspaper in the United States and you could catch a bunch of their reporters and employees saying on hidden camera that they are 99% Republican conservatives who hate liberals and Democrats, you don't think the elites in this country and all of the liberals would be alarmed that every single newspaper in the country was controlled by people who don't hire one person who's a liberal? And yet it's perfectly fine for these tech overlords to have the kind of control that they have and to literally boast about the fact that they can't think of one employee among the hundreds of thousands of employees that they have. They can't think of one employee who voted for Trump when half the country voted for Trump. That's where we're headed.
That's scary.
It's where we already are, actually. If you haven't seen the Project Veritas video, I suggest you go and look at it. It's quite illuminating. And get on Gab. I want to take a moment to do something that may tick some of you off, but I feel the need to do this. I'm going to spend a few minutes defending Steve Bannon and Ann Coulter, both of whom have come under a bit of attack. Steve got himself into hot water and said some things, some of which he denies in this Michael Wolff book that came out, and he's now gone from Breitbart. And that's fine. I mean, I'm not really upset about that. There are obviously consequences to the speech that he engaged in, and he's managed to make some mistakes and alienate himself. But when I went to Breitbart and they published their article saying that Bannon was gone, I decided to go down into the comments section below because I just wanted to see how Breitbart readers were reacting. And, about half of it was bots and liberals just sort of dancing on his grave, and I didn't care about that. But of the half that were clearly Breitbart fans and users, a large percentage of them were basically saying, who needs him? F Steve Bannon, he brought this on himself, goodbye, who cares, And I was reading that thinking, that's pretty ungrateful. This is the man who brought Breitbart to where it is, and without Breitbart the year before last, Trump would not have won that election. He needed some vehicle out there that could echo the positions that he was taking and back him up. Imagine that race without Breitbart, which was literally one of the only outfits out there, news outfits, that was backing the president of the United States, or at least backing the positions that he was taking on issues. And Steve came on board that campaign, and I'll invite you to remember that when the Access Hollywood tape came out, and it was either Trump or Bannon that told the story, but no one denied it. Trump went around the room of all of his advisors asking them how they felt the campaign was now, what position it was in now that tape was out. And there were, half the people told him he should drop out. Half of them told him he was going to lose. And when he got to Steve Bannon, and he was asking for percentages of, his chances of winning, no one was over 50%. And he gets to Steve Bannon, and Steve Bannon says 100%. You continue to talk about the issues you're talking about, and you're going to win 100%. And even Trump said to him, now come on, it can't be 100%. And Bannon said, you stick to the issues that you're talking about, and you're going to win. I cannot tell you, because I've been involved in campaigns. There are dark moments in campaigns, when it seems like everything's lost, you're taking a hit, what have you. For there to be a person in the room who says, buck up, don't worry, everything's going okay. That was a vital moment and a really crucial thing that Steve Bannon did in a very dark moment in the Trump campaign. And I'm telling these stories to make the point that Steve Bannon has done a pile of good things. He was an indispensable part of the victory and the victories that we've been achieving over the last couple of years. And I'm not trying to downplay the mistakes he's made around this Michael Wolff book, and punishment is deserved. But to simply pile on his grave or to dismiss him or to throw him away, I think is a huge mistake. We don't have enough talented people on our side to be casting talented people to the side of the road. So whatever punishment he needs to take, fine, but we need to get him dusted off and back in the fight as soon as possible, and not just thrown away and dismissed. And I was talking to Doris about this the other day, but imagine a scale in which you're weighing two sides. If you piled all of the good things that Steve Bannon has done and then put this Michael Wolff crap on the other side, believe me, the first stuff weighs a lot heavier, and we have to be a little bit more loyal than that. And I realize people think he's been disloyal to Trump, and okay, fine. I'm not sure I totally agree with that, but these were stupid things to say, and I'm not suggesting that he shouldn't suffer some consequences, but I am just making the point that I am not with those that are ready to completely just throw him away. I want to see Steve Bannon back in the action because he's a smart guy, and we need him fighting on our side.
I agree with that, but what's with Ann Coulter? She comes out sounding so negative about Trump sometimes.
Well, and this is good transition. So Ann will jump on Trump at the slightest sign that he is going soft on immigration. And my argument about Ann is that she's kind of the Thomas Paine of this revolution. I mean, she's the radical, and she's never going to stop screaming about the things that she cares about. And, remember, her book had a lot of influence on Trump's positions on immigration. He understood, I think, instinctively where people were on that, and that's why he grabbed onto that issue. I've never really believed it's Trump's number one issue. I think the economy and the deregulation and the tax cuts, the kinds of things that he's gotten done, were really the things that are closest to his heart as a businessman. But I'm not suggesting he doesn't believe in these immigration issues. I think he does. But I don't think he's quite as motivated about it as, say, Ann Coulter is. Now, someone has to be the town crier on that. Ann fills a position of constantly screaming about this because it's not like Trump is going to constantly scream about it, and he will in these meetings sometimes sort of give you signals that are very troubling. And she's provided this service before. On the campaign, there was a Republican debate when he seemed to be backtracking on H-1B visas, and Ann squawked a lot, and then within 24 hours, the Trump campaign put out a press release making it very clear that they hadn't moved on the position, reaffirming where Trump was. And so this has happened before. And I've noticed that Trump has now, in the last day or so, sent out signals to reassure people that he hasn't moved on this. Now, that, I think, is a direct reaction to what Ann Coulter does. Remember, he only follows about 50 people on Twitter, and Ann is one of them. And she knows that he follows her. So she is essentially just continuing to lay down the law that this is a subject she expects him to stay ironclad on. And when he sort of seems to be a little squishy, she squawks and he responds. I don't think this is a bad thing. I saw somebody comment the other day that on my own feed that Ann should just stay quiet until he actually does something. She should just stay quiet. She shouldn't complain until he actually does something. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, you want to wait until he actually does something bad on immigration, right? We're going to wait until he actually signs a bill or something that's atrocious? No, folks, that's not how politics works. You make a big fight and a big stink before your politician makes the mistake you don't want them to make. Because if you wait until after he's actually signed a really horrible immigration bill, then it's too late. It's way, way, way too late. Now, I have said before on this podcast that I think a lot of this is just about kind of the way Trump is. He's not a politician when those cameras are rolling. He's, and especially when he's in meetings. And does rightly point out that he seems to just agree with the last person who says something. And I think that's true, but I don't think it's sincere. I think it's just an affectation. This is the way that Trump is. When he's talking to you, whatever you're saying, he's going to be agreeable to that because it's a nice way of buttering you up. It's a nice way of sort of having a good meeting. It doesn't mean he's actually agreeing with you. That's the point. And so when the cameras roll and you see him agree with Feinstein and then agree with McCarthy, and he seems to be agreeing with A, and then he's agreeing with B, and then he's agreeing with negative A, and he's agreeing with negative B, and you're like, what does he really care about? He's not actually agreeing with everybody in reality. He's just being agreeable. And it's just, I've watched him now for 2 years, and it's just my sense of this is who he is in a meeting. If you say, we really ought to let everybody stay here, nobody should be deported, Trump's just likely in a meeting to say, yeah, I understand that. That sounds right. And then if the next person in the meeting says we should deport every single person in the country, even the last 10 years worth of people who got citizenship, they should all be deported too and have their citizenship taken away. Trump would probably say, yes, I understand. That's, we definitely should investigate that. It's just his way of being agreeable in a meeting. It doesn't mean he actually agrees with those things or that he's going to do them. And I think understanding that about him helps to kind of watch him then on camera and not necessarily get wound up about everything he says. But again, I still think it's okay for Ann Coulter, at the slightest sign that he is maybe going soft on immigration, to do what she does, which is to continue to plant her flag and say, no, 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 because somebody has to have that role. Because it's not like there aren't Feinsteins and everybody else, on the other side, basically constantly squawking that you have to give amnesty to all these folks. So somebody has to sort of play the alternative role. And there aren't a lot of people out there doing it, and it's a role that Anne has defined for herself, and so I'm perfectly fine with that. I don't necessarily see this as a break between the two of them. She can criticize him and hammer him all day long, and that's fine. That's how politics works. Until he actually does something, policy-wise, that is a mistake, that's when a real break will come between the two of them. But I think she sees it as sort of her role. And if people sort of read her tweets and they think, oh, well, she hates Trump now. She doesn't hate Trump. She's just being Ann Coulter and being on message and spanking him when she feels like he's off topic. But I'm sure she'd readily take a meeting with him and meet him at the Trump Hotel for drinks and just have dinner with him or whatever. I don't think it would necessarily affect her relationship with him until he actually does something.
Well, this whole way that he operates, it's kind of like part of his negotiating or act that he goes through. I mean, if you go through a negotiation and the first thing you tell someone is, absolutely, I'm not going to do that, people aren't going to negotiate, right? So with Trump, it's like he says yes to this and yes to that, but then they come down to it and, oh, well, no, of course I didn't mean that we would give away that. And so then people are surprised because they think he's been so agreeable.
And I think he also knows that there's a whole team behind him that includes Stephen Miller that actually interacts with Republican leadership on the House and Senate and talks about everything that's going to be in or out of a bill, whether it's immigration or tax cuts or whatever. So he understands that he can kind of say whatever he wants in meetings with people, and that's not an ironclad promise of any kind, that still has to filter back into language into a bill in which his team is not going to allow it. So he's, kind of doing the good cop, bad cop thing too, where he can seem kind of affable. I really think that what was going on in that meeting was, of course, he was getting all this stuff that he's a buffoon, so he opened up the meeting to show how cordial he is and how everybody gets along, and he destroyed that whole stupid lie, that narrative that the mainstream media was trying to spin, that he's somehow dangerous and loony, because when you see him interacting in that meeting, it all seemed perfectly rational. But also, he knew that this would be one of the few times that a lot of Americans might watch a video of him in action as president, and so he wanted to seem upbeat and affable and agreeable with everybody. So the fact that right after the cameras are off, his team will make clear in the negotiations that no, none of that stuff's going to happen unless we get a wall. And in other words, immediately the bad cops come in. That all happens off camera. What he wanted the average American to see was just Trump being a nice guy. And I don't think it had any bearing on the negotiations that were going on behind the scenes. And everyone in that room knew it. I mean, when Feinstein was trying to get him to agree to a clean DACA bill, she knew that wasn't necessarily going to produce a clean DACA bill. She just wanted to get the president to say yes so that she could then call him a liar or somebody who had betrayed them later on. She was simply playing politics in that room. No one in that room was actually negotiating the details of the bill. They were all posturing and trying to score political points, including Trump. So I noticed that if you want to talk about what he's actually done, he just announced, the day before that meeting that 200,000 Salvadorans who'd been given temporary residency in the United States after an earthquake in like 2000 were not going to have their visas renewed, and it was time for them to go home. And of course, there's normal hair pulling and gnashing of teeth from all of the open borders folks, but I think 18 years was plenty of time for people to be given a reprieve from a country because of a earthquake, and it's time for them to go home. So I also noticed that there was this federal judge in San Francisco who just blocked the expiration of the DACA program. This is judicial activism at its finest and its most extreme, because the program is not legal. And everyone knows that because the program for parents was already deemed in federal court to be illegal, and the DACA program is essentially identical to it. And the president was simply acquiescing to that and suggesting that come March, there wouldn't be any more renewals of the DACA waivers because the program's illegal. Now, of course, liberals have sued, and they've gone exactly what they do. They go to Hawaii or San Francisco to find a liberal judge appointed by Obama or Clinton to essentially act as a legislator and block it. And so an injunction has been put. Literally now, this is an injunction on the expiration of the DACA program, which is itself not legal. It's amazing to me, and I don't understand why the Senate doesn't bring impeachment proceedings against these federal judges who are clearly acting as politicians and all the visa ban stuff, the Supreme Court sided with the president. We knew that once it got out of the Ninth Circus and into the hands of the Supreme Court, that they would follow the Constitution and make it clear that the president has wide latitude when it comes to visas and immigration and things like that. And none of these things have held up. They're all delaying tactics. It seems to me that that's grounds for senators to say, look, you cannot use the courts as a judge to delay things that are not legal. And you should be impeached for that. You only really need to bring impeachment proceedings against one judge one time and remove them to send the message. Believe me, other judges will stop doing what they're doing because they don't want to lose all the pay and benefits that comes from that great job. Another example of the 180-degree tactics that I've talked about constantly on this program, the fact that there is nothing that liberals believe in except the acquisition of power and control, and that anything they claim they stand for or any moral high ground they take, it's always phony because last week they had the opposite position and next week they'll go back to that position. Everything is a tactic to gain control in a political debate. And a good example was just executed in the last week with all of this crap about Trump's mental health and how the mainstream media channels were having on these psychiatrists to talk about how Trump may be mentally unfit, and that apparently members of Congress, Democrats, had some psychiatrist come into a meeting and describe why the president may be unfit. And they're talking about, there was this great clip of a guy from CNN saying that it's really important that we talk. It may be uncomfortable, but we have to talk about this. And then somebody produced a clip of him, this exact same guy from CNN, last year saying that all of this talk about 2 years ago during the election, all of this talk about Hillary maybe being sick and unwell is verboten. How dare anybody bring these subjects of her health up? And that is a low thing to do, and it has no place in this election, right? So it's the same guy 2 years ago saying that it is completely inappropriate to talk about Hillary's health, and then here he is in the last week saying we have to talk about Trump's mental health. It's imperative. And it may be difficult, but we have to do it. You see, they don't believe in any of this stuff. And their examples of their hypocrisy are legion. Legion, folks. You all know this. But every time you see them getting on their high horse and claiming that something's a moral imperative, they don't mean it. They never do. Just like the whole Me Too hysteria, suddenly they care about sexual harassment of women when they were confronted with this exact same issue 20 years ago with Bill Clinton. They made strenuous defenses of him and of why this is people's private lives and it's what consenting adults do. And there were feminists who were saying, well, frankly, I would get on my knees for the president because of where he is politically. And you had some prominent feminists talking about how maybe there needs to be a one free grope rule for people like Bill Clinton. One excuse after another. It's just sex, folks. Here we are 20 years later, and they're accusing Trump of these same kinds of things, and now it's the most important issue in the world, and how could we possibly have somebody in the White House who may have done these types of... You get it, right? They don't actually care about any of these things. It's always a hoax, every single time. Every single time. So I want to talk about 2018. I noticed there have been a slew of Republican congressmen deciding not to run for re-election. Some of this is never Trumpers who needed to go, yay. But some of this is also Republicans in California and New York and some other blue states because, take Darrell Issa, for instance, barely won re-election in the last campaign by just a few hundred votes. It was very, very thin. He understands that tax cut bill was brutal on blue states like California, and even though he voted against it, I'm sure, I haven't actually checked the vote, but I mean a bunch of Republicans in blue states voted against the bill. Whether he voted for it or against it, it's still going to get used against him in the next campaign. And he can rightly see that it's going to be very difficult for him to win with all the hostility in California and the anti-Trump bias for him to pull off another victory. So he's getting out while the getting's good. And I have said this on my Gab feed, and I'm going to say it here. There is no doubt in my mind that the House is going to lose seats in blue states. New York, California, other blue states, they're going to lose seats. The country is realigning, and places like California are becoming even more blue and hostile to the Make America Great agenda, the whole nationalist agenda, what have you. It is incumbent on the House Republican Campaign Committee to identify 20 to 30 House seats in red states that are currently held by Democrats for flipping. They have to defeat those Democrats. They have to target those seats because I take it to the bank right now, you're going to lose seats in blue states. You have to pick them up in red states. And if you don't pick them up in red states, if you don't have a plan for picking them up in red states, then the House is sincerely in jeopardy. The only way I see of saving the House is by targeting these Democrat congressmen in red states where Trump won big. And they're defeatable. You come at them with everything. They voted no on the tax cuts, which benefit people in the red states. You have to come at them with their record of opposition to Trump and everything that's been going on. Run a pro-Trump candidate and defeat them in these places. It can be done, and it needs to be done. As far as what the 2018, I've said this before, I don't think the tax cuts are enough. I have concerns that what has passed so far has been basically the Trump chamber agenda, the stuff that the conservatives can agree with him on, but the nationalist agenda has been slowed. And of course, any kind of a DACA compromise that grants amnesty and doesn't dramatically change. We'll just have to see the deal, and I've talked about this in previous ones. If they make any deal, it is about 99% likely to be a terrible deal. Anything like that is going to ensure losses in 2018, and I've remarked before that I don't think that's necessarily unintentional. You have to look at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and some of these never-Trumpers and ask yourself, isn't it a good scenario for them in the first year to get all of the stuff that they want, the deregulation, the tax cuts, all that great stuff, and then essentially to lose, to lay down on the mat in round 3? Because if Trump continues to have full control of the government, he's likely to get the nationalist agenda passed. And if you're a never-Trumper, if you're in this camp where you're a conservative but not a nationalist, and so you want the sort of fiscal agenda but nothing else, then your best of both worlds is total control for the first 2 years, get the stuff you want, and then lose on purpose so that you can thwart the nationalist agenda. Better to have the Democrats in control of the House and have Trump stopped. I mean, if you think about it, that's an even better world for them because it means that nothing legislatively can move, but Trump can continue to deregulate, which is what they want. In many ways, I'm looking at what's been accomplished, and it's very pleasing to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. And if the Democrats get the House, it almost starts to grind the Trump agenda to a halt. That's like the perfect scenario. If it's almost as if the chamber members sat down right after Trump got elected and plotted the next 2 or 3 years. And if they did, just assume in your mind's eye that they sat down in a room the day after the election and decided how they would, in the most ideal world, like the next 3 years to go? In what way have things not gone exactly like that? The best case scenario for the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and the open borders folks. Squeeze as much of the deregulation and tax cuts, all the stuff from his agenda that you love, get that all up front, and then disempower him by losing one or both of the congressional chambers so that you can grind his nationalist agenda to a halt. Wait him out until he's out of office, and then go back to trying to elect Republicans that are basically just U.S. Chamber of Commerce Republicans. That's my concern. In my mind, the 2018 agenda should be a full-throated attempt to get everything passed. I've been in this scenario before. I was working for a congressman in 2000 when Republicans, who had already had the Congress, won the White House with George W. Bush. And they had full control of the government starting in 2001. And I remember saying to my boss at the time, you have absolutely no guarantee of having full control like this for longer than one term, 2 years. So my suggestion is move everything. Push everything that you possibly can out the gate, because you may not have this scenario 2 years from now. Now, as it turned out, they had it for 6 years, and that was because really of 9/11 and the politics of the country changed, and they were able actually to pick up seats in 2002 because we were at war, and Republicans were perceived as the war-footing party, and the voters were not ready to go and give any victories to the Democrats at that point. So it was kind of a fluke, and it ended up lasting for 3 terms for 6 years. But I still think the point is the same. When you get full control of the government, when the Democrats got full control in 2008, they only had it for 1 term. 2 years, and then they lost the House. So I don't know whether they're going to lose the House, but my advice is to act as if you are going to lose the House and to not leave anything on the shelf. And don't worry about taking bad votes, because the president has appointment powers, and a lot of these congressmen who lose their seats, he can make them ambassadors. He can give them lots of positions and rewards, so nobody needs to fear the outcome of the election. Just get everything done. Now, that would be the ideal scenario if our caucus weren't filled with a bunch of never-Trumpers who I believe at the end of the day may very well just want to throw this fight, and that's the sad reality. So I am concerned that 2018 is going to be a very tough year. I think we may look back on 2017 and very blissfully, because I'm not convinced that Republicans can get a lot done. They need to if they want to have any chance in the elections in November. I think the budget's going to tell us a lot. They're having real trouble cutting the budget and even passing a budget. And so a lot is going to be revealed in the next month or so, because they may kick the can down the road again with a continuing resolution, which just shows you that it's a dismal start to 2018. If that's how it goes, I think it'll just be more of the same throughout 2018, eventually probably ending in a loss in the House in November. I wish I had better news, but unfortunately, I would be more upbeat if I actually thought that the people on our side who were running things were actually, MAGA and Trump supporters, that they were on board for this agenda. If everybody was actually rowing in this boat, I would be much more positive about what could be accomplished. I've said this in the podcast before, that when Republicans stick together, they don't lose. And I still believe that when Republicans are united, they're undefeatable. But of course, Republicans are not united. There are all sorts of people within the caucus working at cross purposes to the Trump agenda. And that's the major problem that we have. The Trump administration announced recently that they're going to open up offshore drilling all over the country. And of course, that is just more winning success on the environmental stuff. And it's just amazing to me what the Trump administration has been able to do on the environmental agenda. And the environmentalists are on their heels and reeling from all this. And it's just glorious to me. But I saw that Rick Scott in Florida squawked about wanting an exemption around Florida, and it looks like the administration may cave on that. And then I read the other day that Chris Christie was whining. He said, well, if Florida can be exempted, why can't other states? And my immediate thought was, well, Chris, because Florida is purple. The fact of the matter is that of course Florida gets the attention it does because it's in play. in the presidential election. New Jersey is not in play. New York is not in play. So do you think they're going to make an exemption for offshore drilling there? No. And this reason why they're going to open up in California. What's the worst that could happen? The people of California are going to get angry and not vote for Trump in the next presidential election? I mean, obviously, all the blue states are along the coasts, and so what are they doing? They're sticking it to them by opening offshore drilling. It's glorious. And of course, the one state that really is in play, Florida, they're going to make an exemption for them. It's politics. But that doesn't offend me. And all of these purists in our party are the same people that have been bringing you a losing strategy for decades. All the people that would make the argument about consistency are the people that have never consistently delivered any victories for you for 50 years. The Democrats play politics. They design their legislation to reward their friends and punish their enemies. And if you balk at them about how inconsistent their philosophy is, they just laugh at you while they go off and have drinks and celebrate their victories. And I'm very pleased to see our side do the exact same thing. You design a tax bill where you're not worried about consistency. You're just sticking it to the blue states and you're rewarding the red states. That's good politics. And when it comes to the environmental agenda, if all of the states that voted against you are along the coasts, then maybe the next thing we need to do is open up offshore oil drilling. I love it. That is playing politics to win. And it's just so damn exciting to finally see it happen on our side. God bless Trump. So there was this story in Breitbart about all the president's victories over the UN. And that was a good little list, 5 things that he had done to take on the UN, including withdrawing from the Paris Climate Accords, and then the speech he gave at the UN, which, let's see, the quote from Breitbart was that he delivered one of the best speeches in September, openly threatening to destroy North Korea, telling the truth about the Iranian regime, blasting socialism. His quote was, "The problem in Venezuela is not that socialism has been poorly implemented, but that socialism has been faithfully implemented." And he stood up for national sovereignty instead of the supranational bureaucrats. I agree, that was a great achievement. Then third, withdrawing from UNESCO, which is the United States Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, which has a strong anti-Israel and anti-Semitic bias. Apparently, Reagan withdrew from UNESCO back in 1984, saying that taxpayers should no longer be on the hook to pay for policies that are hostile to our values and make a mockery of justice and common sense, and Trump did the same thing, which is great. Fourth, withdrawing from the Global Compact on Migration. This was obviously to allow him to keep going forward on cutting back on refugees into the country and building the wall, all of which, that whole Global Compact was basically an open borders document. So he was going to get us out of that so he could continue to push his Trump nationalism. Great again. And then fifth, the fact that he recognized Jerusalem. Everybody makes a big deal out of that, as we've said here. Every president for the last 30 years has been promising on the campaign trail to do that. And it's just been a way to signal to Jews to get their vote, and sometimes evangelicals who support Israel. And it was one of those things where, yes, you say it on the campaign trail to get votes, but then you actually don't do it. And Trump said from day one he wasn't a politician and that he was a different kind of person running for office. And he believes that when he says something on the campaign trail, makes a promise, that he's supposed to do that. And so he did it. And the fact is that all these people who were squawking, I mean, half the people who were in Congress lambasting the president for that had actually voted for the bill that recognized Jerusalem as the capital. And, you know, they all wanted to play politics and have their cake and eat it too. And Trump basically came along and said, no, you passed a bill saying that, and we all promised on the campaign trail that we're going to do it, so I'm going to do it. It's done. And you wait. He's trying to cut off money to the Palestinians too. He understands leverage. And he's going to get movement on this issue. You watch. I don't know what form it's going to take, but he's going to get movement on this issue. He's already gotten movement out of the North Koreans. They're sending athletes to the Winter Olympics down in South Korea, and they've opened up talks with the South Koreans. Everybody decries his approach because it's so unusual, but he gets movement on these issues. And I bet you the stuff he's doing with Pakistan, he's going to get movement on that too. I was reading a timeline, somebody I follow who was giving updates on the protests in Iran. And I was reading these details about people showing up and attacking the banks that have the regime money and being arrested and some of them being beaten and young people being taken away and then the parents being called later and told to come pick up the body, and obviously there's torture going on. And I was having one reaction to it, just sort of admiring the strength and courage of the Iranian people when they are under the thumb of such a powerful and oppressive regime. I mean, it is a total surveillance society, and to raise your voice and to go out into the streets and to protest is so darn courageous. It's just really, really impressive to me. But the other reaction I was having was, I was seeing the parallels to what our own ancestors gave us. First of all, when they go and attack the regime's banks, or when they go to the coast and they burn a ship filled with oil, that's essentially the same thing that the Tea Partiers did in Boston 250 years ago, attacking essentially the revenue of the king as a way of sending a signal that they felt oppressed. I mean, it's the same thing. And I was thinking that, there are a lot of people in our past who did courageous things like that. We live, we're talking about our tech overlords and some of the oppression that goes on here, and it's real, but we still live in a relatively free society where we can speak up. And people like the Iranians don't. And, we live as beneficiaries of ancestors who lived in oppressive regimes, or who could be summarily arrested and executed and accused of treason for speaking out against the king, or asking for rights that we ultimately had to fight for. And they took those risks, and they got shot at, and they got killed, and they got tortured, and they got expelled from wherever they were living and had to live in some other place. They suffered and starved. And you think about the winters at Valley Forge and the kinds of things that people went through in order to give us these basic freedoms laid down in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, and how much we take that all for granted. I look at those people in Iran who really are in a hole, to try to climb out from where they are and to create a free society. They have a long way to go, and they are facing a regime that has so many more tools than the King of England had 250 years ago. And they are showing, frankly, more courage than our ancestors did, because it is that much tougher in a modern society with a dictator, who has CCTV cameras everywhere and has spies and all sorts of modern science at their disposal for torture and the rest. And yet they still go out into the streets and they brave those things to try to achieve something better for their children and their grandchildren. And how much I just was thinking about how much we take all that sacrifice that was laid down for us. We take it for granted. We live very, very comfortable lives, relatively speaking, that were bequeathed to us by people who suffered in real ways to give that to us. And it's worth thinking about, not just around the 4th of July. So, a hysteria alert on the Me Too movement. I saw the other day that Catherine Deneuve and about 100 other feminist elites in France started pushing back on the movement, saying that they think this whole movement is basically a hatred of men and sexuality, and that it's a witch hunt, and it's pushing for sexual puritanism. These are all things you heard on this podcast. If you read that article, then nothing in there was anything you hadn't heard me say months ago on this podcast. And of course, there's been an immediate backlash and all the feminists setting their hair on fire. How dare they say those things? I thought it was interesting that Catherine and her cohorts were making the point that men are dangerous. And it reminded me that Camille Pagula has also said something similar. I've watched her in interviews make the same point, that there is something dangerous about men. And obviously some men are more dangerous than others. It's a matter of degrees, but that is part of masculinity. There is an element of heat and potential for violence and aggressiveness that is, partly mixed up in the testosterone that makes men who they are.
And the old saying that good girls always want to have a bad boy.
Well, and because, yes, the fact that there's something in estrogen in women that is attracted to that, right? I mean, there are primal forces at work here that go back tens of thousands of years and work on our brains and make men who they are and make women who they are and make us attracted, make one sex attracted to the opposite sex for those reasons. And this stuff is very primal, very genetic, and it has a long, long history. I saw that Michael Douglas was pushing back as well, trying to get out in front of some accusation being made that something happened 20 years ago. I saw that James Rosen was forced out at Fox News over the Christmas break quietly while no one was looking. Just as a side note, there is enough talent that has been fired from Fox News to start a competitive channel that could crush Fox News in the ratings. I mean, if you take Bill O'Reilly and James Rosen and then Eric Bolling and a bunch of other talented people and put them in their own competitive network, not only do they have the talent to make that all work, but you could give a show to Ann Coulter and a couple of other people who haven't been given shows, and you could just decimate Fox News in the ratings. I'd watch that channel. But back on the point about the hysteria, I do think at the core of this, it starts out as a movement to attack men who are essentially rapists and who are committing real definable crimes that everybody can agree to. And then it quickly devolved into essentially just attacking masculinity and flirting and men showing an interest in women. And at its core is this sort of lament from the feminists, many of whom are lesbians, that they even have to put up with men in the world. I mean, if you listen and read these articles of a lot of these accusations that are made, at their core, it's literally just a whine that there are men in the room. That if I'm in the room with a man and I'm wearing a skirt, he might actually come up and say hi to me and he might ask me out. And oh my God, why can't they all just go away? Really, when you boil this all down and read some of these things, I've read some of these accusations and I just shake my head. I'm like, they just want a workspace with no men in it. Which was leads me to this other conversation that Doris and I were having the other day about this sort of lack of resilience and so many children or teenagers or young adults who are having difficulty adjusting to the adult world, still living at home or not able to make a living. And it got me to thinking about, Doris and I were kind of talking about what causes that. And in my mind, a lot of this comes from an overemphasis on childhood. I mean, we got really upset at some point. I think we got the luxury to do this because we ended infant mortality. I mean, people for millennia, half their children didn't survive childhood. And so people were in some ways a little bit detached from their children. I mean, it was kind of common to not even fully engage with your children until they were a little bit older because people just weren't sure if they were going to live. And then in the last couple hundred years, we managed to almost entirely eliminate child mortality, and so people stopped having large families. Birth control came along. People began to have much fewer children because those children would survive, and then those children became more important to people. And so some of this was sort of a natural outcome of our modern society, but the end result of which has been that there's almost a fetish around childhood, and Disney has kind of helped with this Disneyfication of childhood, but a lot of people who have children seem to want to create this fantasy world for their child from day one, in which they're basically protected from any bad ideas and bad experiences, and they don't have to deal with disturbing concepts or things because they're too young for all of that. And to bail them out of any circumstances and to always take their side against the teachers, right? So that's why discipline is nearly entirely disappeared from the schools. But essentially the child just needs all of this protection all of the time. And then with the idea that, something about child labor laws and trying to keep 6-year-olds out of factories eventually turned into not even having teenagers working at McDonald's. We've made it so difficult that basically employers won't even consider 15 or 16-year-olds. And I have seen in my own eyes the last couple of generations, a lot of kids go off to college who have never worked in high school. I mean, most kids in high school now don't work. Now, when I was in high school, most of us had a job doing something. And so we have created this whole world where children are protected right up through to college. And then my thought is, okay, so you have created this Disneyfied world and you've insulated children out of this tremendous love for them to have. We want them to have a wonderful, beautiful childhood. Okay, that has no connection to the world as the adult, but then eventually they're going to get spit out into this adult world. What would your reaction be if you'd had this childhood? Who would want to leave that childhood? when the adult world is so completely unsatisfying? You were taken care of and you were protected in the first 2 decades. Why would you want to leave that? And so I think this sort of failure to launch that we see is very explainable. What is it about the adult world that is more attractive to a young person who has had one of these great childhoods? Why would they want to go on and become an adult?
And so they don't,
Well,
in a lot of cases.
Exactly. That's my point. And they don't necessarily, some of it's a loss of resilience too, because by protecting them, you haven't created an adult who can be resilient and handle things. But, why would you want, if mom will keep making meals and doing your laundry until you're 30, why would you say no? And if your parents are constantly willing to bail you out, why wouldn't you take that? But also just mentally, I think it's very difficult for a lot of people to adjust. We wonder why there's such an increase in depression among young adults. Well, who wouldn't be depressed if you lived at Disneyland for 20 years and then one day the park officials came along and said, you have to leave? And by the way, there's this whole world outside of Disneyland that isn't like Disneyland. It's not as nice, and you have to live out there for the rest of your life.
A lot of it started with, I first noticed it when it became unacceptable for students to get anything other than an A. That getting a B was very bad and C was crushing. To be average was crushing. It seems like no parent wanted their child to be average. And I even saw it in sports, as we all did, that there's a trophy for the loser as well as there's a trophy for a winner. And sometimes until you get to a certain age level, you're not even allowed to use those words like winner and loser. So there's no things that occur in a child's life that they feel disappointment in. And so they don't learn how to live with disappointment. And, being permissive as a parent isn't doing your child any good.
Well, it sacrifices the later for the now, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this decision to concentrate on making sure that childhood is as perfect and as injury-free as possible can in many cases succeed in creating a pretty good childhood for the child, except that unless you're going to cryogenically freeze them, they aren't going to stay children forever. Eventually, they have to be a 22-year-old, and then a 32-year-old, and then a 42-year-old. And that comes with a certain level of responsibility and self-autonomy and an ability to kind of move through and move on. And if you have hobbled emotionally and spiritually your child's ability to do that as an adult, then you gave them this great gift of a childhood, but nothing beyond that. The whole classification of a teenager is a made-up thing. It came post-World War II. No one even used the word teenager, did not exist before World War II. And it was created by the Madison Avenue because all of these baby boomer kids had money. Parents were giving them $10 on the weekend or, $1 on the weekend or whatever to go to the soda fountain shop. So they had money in their pocket. And this became a targeted group by advertisers. And so they coined this term teenager. This was not something that even, for millennia people even thought about. Children were essentially considered young adults. And the only negative was they were just too weak. They couldn't physically pick things up or they couldn't physically do all the things. And so they needed to be kind of protected from that for a little bit of time. But everybody sort of looked at children as future adults from a very early age. And by 8 or 9, they were, doing chores around the house. And by their teenage years, they were fully involved in whatever the family business was. I don't care if that's a blacksmith or a farmer or factory work or whatever. They were out physically doing all of that work that everybody else was doing. No one thought of childhood as anything other than basically an interim step to adulthood. That yes, they're a little bit smaller and weaker, they're growing, but they're growing up to be an adult. And so the sooner you get them used to what it's like to be an adult, the better. That was everybody's thought for basically 100,000 years. And what has happened in the last 50 years is almost an opposite thought, right? Which is protect them from the adult world for as long as possible, which, like I said, can work like a dream while it's happening, but it means that the moment it's over, it's really over. And you have produced an adult who, again, I'm going to ask this question again. If you've had a pretty good childhood in which you were protected and lots of trips to Disneyland and everything was good and you didn't have to work, you didn't have a job and you basically got to play video games. I mean, in other words, you were a little prince or a princess for 20 years. In what world would you want to go out and be an adult? Why would you want to leave that?
Well, some of us remember how our country reacted when we were bombed at Pearl Harbor. Can you imagine if you instituted the draft today? What would happen? People would refuse to go.
Well, right. I mean, we do very selective recruiting now to try to find the kids essentially who have come from families that have prepared them for adult responsibilities. If we had to of course, technology has made it so that you don't really need lots of people to fight wars. But in your scenario, if we had to draft the vast majority of 18-year-olds into the military, it would become readily apparent that most of them are incapable of being sent out into the woods for a week at a time, and coming back and finding their way back, or, figuring. In other words, most of them would just simply sit down.
Yeah.
And capitulate. And if you attempted to train them and then sent them out on the battlefield, I would imagine a lot of them would just surrender. And I don't mean that in the way like they'd be traitors. I just mean that the moment they came into conflict, which is brutal and hard, if the option to just give up and go to the prisoner of war camp was available, a lot of them would simply take you up on that.
And I hope some of this is changing because more students are going to community college at the same time that they're going to school. I think we're going to get back to going in the trades and so forth. And this is going to make some of these kids grow up a little faster.
Well, look, it shouldn't need to be said, and I don't like to run my podcast where we have to constantly say, but this doesn't mean, but I'm going to do it anyway in this case. There are lots of great kids out there. Yes. And there are lots of people out there who are raising their children with responsibility and insisting that they get a job in high school and that they work for their own money. And I mean, this was the experience I had as a teenager, was that if I wanted to have inherit the car that came down from my brother, if I wanted it to have gas and insurance, I had to go get a job to do that. And so I went and got a job in high school so that I could afford to have spending money on the weekends. Nobody was giving me any money to do that. I was being provided food and a house to live in, but I wasn't being given any spending money. There was no allowance. I had to go out and earn that. And I know there are lots of parents that do that. I think what we're talking about, though, is an overarching trend. In a country with tens of millions of children, the fact that there may be millions of people who are doing it right doesn't change the fact that there may be 10 or 20 million children where it's not being done right, or 30 or 40 million. I'm talking about we were talking about the overarching trend. The fact that we can find millions of parents that are doing it right doesn't change the point that things don't seem to be going in the right direction. I'm making the argument that part of this is just kind of our modern world. It's allowed people to sort of overemphasize childhood. But what I'm describing also is the sort of adult consequences of that outcome. And unless things were to really break down in society, I don't see, people putting a lot of burdens on children in the way that they might have done in the past, because they don't have to. And I'm sure lots of people are very happy about that. All that we're talking about here is sort of how you do this transfer. How do you give children an idyllic childhood and then turn them into responsible, hardworking adults who can make sacrifices for the long term? That wasn't what you taught them when they were children. Doris and I saw the film Darkest Hour this week. And it's a nice companion to Dunkirk, the movie that came out a few months ago. This movie takes place right up until that point. Essentially, it's the month preceding Dunkirk. And it focuses entirely on Churchill and him being made the prime minister, because they'd essentially lost faith in Chamberlain at that point. And there's a lot of uncertainty in that first month. There are a lot of people who don't necessarily want him to be prime minister. There are a lot of people still hoping to make some kind of deal with Hitler because, and I know they were sort of supposed to be portrayed as bad guys, but I actually had sympathy for those members of the cabinet who were arguing for peace with Hitler because, and again, if you don't understand what happened in World War I, you cannot understand the thinking that led to that appeasement during the 30s. And if you have any interest in this subject, I recommend Dan Carlin's podcast on World War I. You can go and download it, for $1 or $2 a podcast. I think it's like 10 episodes. But he does a wonderful job of walking you through World War I. It's basically the equivalent of Ken Burns' Civil War, and I highly recommend it. But that was such carnage It was such a meat grinder, and an entire generation of young men in France and in Germany and in England were wiped out. Sometimes 30 to 40 to 50,000 in a day. It was such carnage. And the people in the government in the 30s and late 30s had lived through all that. And they knew that things had only become more mechanized since then. They knew that the killing machines were even more lethal than they had been in World War I. And they were desperate to find some way to avoid that, even at the cost of making some compromises. Now, I'm not saying I agree with it. I'm just saying that I fully understand that impulse because they had lived through something that we did not live through, and they wanted desperately to avoid it. And so the movie depicts this sort of pushback against Churchill, who was very aggressive and wanted to, go to war, essentially, in every way. And he had people in his cabinet who were pressuring him to make a peace deal, some of which was motivated by a thought that they couldn't win. I mean, some of them sincerely believed that Hitler had done a much better job of rearming the Germans and they were not prepared. Something, of course, Churchill had been warning them about for 10 years in repeated speeches at the Parliament, and they hadn't listened to, which is why he ultimately was given the leadership position, but they weren't ready. And so he has to make some difficult decisions, and it's sort of a movie about how he kind of finds the strength to lead the British people through what is going to be a very, very difficult world war.
So the most affecting part of the movie to me was when he went to the people themselves in the underground on the train, and he was asking them what they should do, whether they should compromise with peace or go to war, and how that really helped him clarify and get the politics out of it. Gary Oldham in this role was fantastic. He should win an Academy Award for it. The other thing that was really interesting is I saw Dunkirk first, and I didn't realize that it was Churchill who came up with the idea of the rescue boats from the populace.
Right. It must be said, though, that Darkest Hour is not very good, accurate history. I think the best that can be said of it is it gets the sentiments right. It does not get a lot of the specific facts right. And I could list 10 things very quickly that are wrong. There's an opening scene in which Churchill is not at the Parliament while Chamberlain is being shouted down. He actually was there. Little things like that. And that scene on the subway that takes place didn't occur. It's totally made up. Now, the specific facts are often wrong in the movie, but when I say the sentiment is correct, Churchill did venture out among the populace at times. He would disappear from 10 Downing Street and he would pop up at a pub or somewhere else just to talk to people and get a feel for where they were. So it does encapsulate how Churchill went about things. So while that scene isn't necessarily accurate, and because those people didn't, it's all made up essentially, it does represent a truth about Churchill that he would venture out to have those conversations with people. So again, you cannot rely on some of the specific elements of the movie. You aren't really getting an accurate history in that way, but it's not wrong. I know that sounds like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth, but the way that Churchill is depicted is correct. The basic sentiments, the pushback, those people pushing back against him in the cabinet may not have said those exact things on those exact same days, but those were real sentiments that were coming at him and that he had to deal with. So, as an overarching theme, the movie is correct. It gets the history basically correct when it comes to tone and sentiment and what the arguments were. It just chooses to be quite liberal in how it specifically portrays the conversations and makes up a lot of things.
I didn't understand why a few years later that he was voted out as prime minister.
Well, it was after the war was over. So, he was really seen as a wartime prime minister, and he was still an imperialist and supported the empire, and I think a lot of people were ready for it to be over and they wanted a peacetime prime minister. So it was kind of like, thank you, but the war's over and we'd like you to retire now. Now, they brought him right back. He served as prime minister in the 50s after the liberal administration that they voted into office managed to wreck everything over the course of 4 or 5 years. They brought the conservatives back and he was prime minister in the 50s again.
Sounds a little bit like U.S. history.
That's about all the time we have for this show. Remember that you can hear this episode and past episodes on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Pocket Cast, YouTube, and even on our own website, thedailystir.com. This is a labor of love, but we need to grow, so I am imploring you to share this show with a friend if you want it to continue. Trump supporters, you are not alone. Goodbye, Doris.
Goodbye, Matt.